A lot of wine lovers don't even bother to combine wine and chocolate. They feel that the rich sweetness of chocolate is just too much for any wine. But I love to layer my vices if I can. One vice is never enough. So I'm determined to find some good pairings. The overarching principle, as always, is that the wine should be sweeter than the dessert or the sweet thing. Otherwise, the wine is going to taste bitter by comparison.
Do you have a thirst to learn about wine? Do you love stories about wonderfully obsessive people, hauntingly beautiful places, and amusingly awkward social situations? Well, that's the blend here on the Unreserved Wine Talk podcast. I'm your host, Natalie McLean, and each week I share with you unfiltered conversations with celebrities in the wine world, as well as confessions from my own tipsy journey as I write my third book on this subject. I'm so glad you're here. Now pass me that bottle, please, and let's get started. Welcome to episode 50. 50, wow, I can't believe it's episode 50. You know, it was December last year when I launched this podcast, so we're coming up on the 1-year anniversary. Wow, I'm glad we've both lasted this long, you and me. All right, Miles and I had dinner last night at one of Ottawa's best new restaurants, Gitane. The food has a French flair, but the restaurant is modern. Dare I say hip? Is it even hip to say hip anymore? Anyway, we love the meal, especially the tuna tartare. I don't think I've had tuna tartare that good anywhere else. I also discovered a Pinot Noir that I want for the Christmas holidays from Lighthall Vineyards in Prince Edward County. It had that perfect balance between Burgundian finesse and North American ripeness. And no, this isn't a commercial for the wine. I'm just sharing my latest discovery with you, as a number of listeners have asked me to do that more often. Now, don't go buying it all on me or I won't share again. Kidding. Sort of. Later today, I'm hosting my first live class for the 5 wine and food pairing mistakes that can ruin your dinner and how to fix them forever. This free class is also when I'll share details about my new in-depth paid course called the Wine Smart course. Catchy, right? A full-bodied framework to taste, pair, and buy wine like a pro. You'll know when you can join me on that free class if you get my wine newsletter. So, on to our juicy wine topics that I'll be chatting with you about in today's Unreserved Wine Talk podcast. How do you pair wine and chocolate? Do the wines change with different types of chocolate? Say milk chocolate versus dark chocolate? How is the 2019 harvest going in BC, Ontario, and Nova Scotia? What can we expect as consumers in terms of style, quality, and price? A side note, when I'm talking about the California harvest of 2017, the devastating one that was affected by wildfires, just as they're experiencing again now, sadly, I mistakenly say 2000, but it should be 2017. I didn't want to remove that part because there's some helpful info in there for you in terms of the impact of the wildfires on the wine's taste. I'll include links to my pairing tips, the wineries mentioned in the harvest updates, and how you can get notified about the free wine class in the show notes at nataliemclean.com/50. All right, let's dive into our topics today.
I'm going to start with wine and chocolate. So let's dive in. I think we enjoy chocolate not just for its taste, but also its texture. It's very, very sensual texture, much like wine. Cocoa butter is one of its main ingredients, as you know. And what's really cool is it melts close to body temperature. So putting a piece of chocolate on your tongue and let it sort of seep out and melt is amazing. And maybe that's why the 18th century Venetian womanizer, Giacomo Casanova, that might ring a bell, drank chocolate daily as an aphrodisiac. Sadly, scientists have proven no link between chocolate and sexual prowess, but they may have discovered that it contains a certain compound that produces a high in the brain that's similar to the feeling of falling in love. Isn't that interesting? Is it no wonder that women crave chocolate more than any other food, and men, apologies, crave pizza? You hopeless romantics. A lot of wine lovers don't even bother to combine wine and chocolate. They feel that the rich sweetness of chocolate is just too much for any wine. But I love to layer my vices if I can. One vice is never enough. So I'm determined to find some good pairings. The overarching principle, as always, is that the wine should be sweeter than the dessert or the sweet thing. Otherwise, the wine is going to taste bitter by comparison. That's no matter what. Eating chocolate, a fruit flan, anything like that. Dark chocolate, as you can imagine, is the easiest chocolate to pair with wine. Often I think it's fortified wines such as Vin du Naturel, Bagnoles, and Morey, both from southern France. They're made from late-picked red Grenache grapes that grow on steeply terraced hillsides. These wines are aged up to 30 months, in oak to create rich dark fruit flavors. Bagnoles is a bit sweeter and more acidic than Morey, and therefore a better match for chocolate, I think. One of the most famous Bagnoles is Domaine de Mas Blanc, while Morey is best known for Mas Emile. Those are worth looking for. They're not a big section, of course, in your liquor store, even smaller than port or sherry, but both remind me a bit of California's late harvest Zinfandel, which also works well. Semi-sweet to sweet sherries have the bonus of a nutty character, which is beautiful. So you always want to think about, if I were making a dessert, a cake, and I had a chocolate cake, what might I swirl in there as another flavor with the chocolate? A nutty flavor like hazelnut or an orange flavor, and look for that in your wines. A raspberry flavor, framboise. I think dry Madeira from the Portuguese island of Madeira doesn't quite work, but sweet versions do, like Momsey. Here's a curveball. How about dark chocolate infused with red hot chili pepper? To me, that requires a fortified wine. I'm going right to the port, probably a vintage port or else a late bottle vintage port, which would be less expensive, ready to drink earlier, but has the heft and the alcohol to handle the spiciness and the dark chocolate. I'm drinking a Rioja, and it is so good. Cune, C-U-N-E. You also want to try Australian liquor muscat or liqueur Tokai, made from muscat and muscadel grapes. You'll have to excuse me with my pronunciations because I read 100 times more than I pronounce things that I see. And so then I stumble on the pronunciation, or is it pronunciation? So Australian liquor muscats, they're dried to a semi-raisin state on the vine, the grapes, then fortified during fermentation. It's aging in barrel, which gives them their aromas of prune, fig, raisin, smoked tar, coffee, nuts, etc. So beautiful. Very much like Baume de Venise muscat from southern France, with orange blossom notes. So great. My favorite pairing for chocolate, no matter what chocolate, is port. Vintage port pairs beautifully. It's got a plummy, sort of grapey notes. I think young ruby port is better with aromas of blackberries and raspberries for certain types of chocolate. But best of all, I guess I'm just a sucker for it, is tawny port, because I think it has a natural affinity with chocolate. It's got caramel, coffee, nuts, dried figs, cinnamon flavor, vanilla spice. And these ports are divine with chocolates like pralines, which is a decadent mixture of sugar and ground hazelnut. Hello, heaven. Tawny ports are well-aged. They're often matured for 10, 20, or 30 years. It's a mix of vintage. That's why you won't see a vintage date on tawnies. The oldest variety is the richest. And you can look for all the name-check brands like Graham's, Dow's, Taylor Fladgate, Fonseca. A cojita is a vintage port because it comes from a single year, but it's still a tawny. It's aged in wood for at least 7 years, though some are matured for more than 30 years. Wow. And therefore have those tawny aromas. Contrastingly, is that a word? Vintage port only spends 2.5 years in wood and then ages in bottle. Some other partners for chocolate that are beautiful, maybe a little less complex, but gorgeous. hedonism scale, 10 out of 10, are fruit-based wines. So when I say fruit-based wines, I mean anything but grapes. So framboise is like raspberry. Southbrook just had that on CTV's The Social, and the hosts loved it. It's so beautiful. It's like pie in a glass. Cassis is fermented black currants. So the fruit is macerated or soaked in alcohol before fermentation for extra extraction of flavor and color. And as you can imagine, just serving it with chocolate as you would make a chocolate cake with a raspberry swirl or a black currant swirl, it's just heaven. I've mentioned Southbrook, but Bonnie Doon Vineyards, Andrew Quaddy in California, a Neige from Quebec, if you want to go with like an apple cider kind of flavor. Let's talk about milk chocolate. Kind of a problem child when it comes to pairing wine because it's got a higher dairy content. Just like milky desserts like ice cream and cheesecake, they kind of tend to clash with wine. So some people pair their milk chocolate mousse or pudding with sparkling wine on the theory that the effervescence cuts through the fat. I don't like that though, unless it's maybe a Moscato d'Asti, which is a sweet Italian, slightly fizzy wine. I find that their texture of sparkling wines is just too light and it kind of makes the wine taste like metal. I think the best match for milk chocolate is Hungarian Tokai, especially with its aromas of butter and honey and apricot and citrus. Tokai is a botrytized wine. The grapes are left on the vine and are infected by a benevolent fungus called Botrytis cinerera or noble rot. It's a good thing. This dehydrates the grapes, concentrating their sugars, acidity, and flavors. Other wines made this way, think Sauterne from Bordeaux, your Chateau Yquem, and Baronaschlesen and Trockenbeerenaschlesen from Germany. Just love saying that, Trockenbeerenaschlesen. So these work well with ganache and buttery, velvety truffles. Oh, truffles. When we're talking white chocolate, it's the sweetest of all, and I have to admit defeat. I think it's just so sweet for most wines. And also, white chocolate is only 20% cacao or cocoa, compared to 75% in bitter dark chocolate. Purists don't consider white chocolate to be real chocolate because it lacks all cocoa solids except for cocoa butter. So if you want to get really snobby, drop that at your next dinner party. Its vanilla flavors pair best with cream liqueurs, say like Bailey's or Starbucks. That's kind of where I would put that pairing. But let me know if you disagree. And just a hint is enough, an excellent partner for lighter desserts that have only a touch of chocolate. Think dipped biscotti, so you got a bit of dipped chocolate biscotti, or a nut-flavored dacquoise. I would pair that with Amaroni's sweet cousin, Reciato del Valpolicella. The grapes for both wines are dried several months before being fermented, and those for Reciato are dried a month longer than Amarone, which gives the wine a deep, sweet taste of raisins and cooked black fruit. Gorgeous with those desserts. Canadian German ice wine, I think it's okay for these kind of dipped fruit or dipped biscotti, but I think full-on chocolate desserts are a bit too rich for ice wine. Ice wine is only about 10 to 11% alcohol, and I just don't think it has the richness to stand up to full-bodied chocolate desserts. All right, so I think that concludes my exhaustive chocolate and wine pairing. I hope that helps. I'd like to tackle a how-to topic with you so you get some real meat, or in this case, chocolate. I also have a resource for you, a pairing resource for food pairings and recipe pairings on my website at nataliemaclean.com/food. Go there for that. And of course, I offer a free online video class to pair wine and food at nataliemaclean.com/class. Now, I am revising that. I am relaunching my class at the end of this month. I am so excited. I'm going to be relaunching a free video class called, I think, 5 wine and food pairing mistakes that can ruin your dinner party, and in brackets, and what to serve instead to wow your guests, or some wordy, breathy subtitle. That'll be a free class where I will teach you some really cool concepts about food and wine pairing, and then I will go into my longer paid course, if you wish to continue the journey with me. And that has been renamed to the Wine Smart course, another breathy long subtitle, a full-bodied framework to taste, pair, and buy wine like a pro. Anyway, I hope you'll join me, even just for the free class. I just want everyone to have more pleasure with wine, no matter what you decide to do. Before we move on to harvest updates, let me talk a little bit about the 2017 California vintage of red wines. As you may know, they are hitting the shelves right now, the red wines from California, and that was the year that the devastating wildfires hit the state. It was tragic. And of course, today, those wildfires still break out around the state. Right now, it's happening around Los Angeles. But let's focus our discussion on the wine regions of California. The result is that for the 2000 vintage of the red wines, far fewer are being released in terms of volume, which is why the supply is low in relation to demand. And of course, prices usually go up. That's good news for wineries, not so great for us as consumers. But the 2018 vintage was a huge one. So prices are bound to come down next year. So it kind of evens out for producers and consumers. This year, we're going to pay more for those wines. Next year, we're going to get a break on prices. This year, wineries are going to kind of make some more money to put in the bank while they have to take a hit next year. Now, the winemakers I contacted say that 2019 will be just as big crop like 2018, maybe bigger. And many producers' tanks are still full with the 2018 vintage, so they're letting the grapes this year, this harvest, hang longer on the vine because of it. Most producers, I need to say, dumped any wine that was tainted by wildfires, that they tasted the taint and they got rid of it. So don't worry about that. One thing I'm waiting to see is if the taint emerges later in the wine's life as it matures. I don't know about that. So we'll have to see. So let's talk about the harvest updates. I'm very excited about this. I've already talked about the California 2019s looking great, big vintage. So let's talk about BC, Ontario, and Nova Scotia. Now, some of the details I'm going to share with you, live reports from winemakers in the field, may sound a little technical, but take this as an opportunity to learn some wine terms, impress your friends, but also to understand the winemaking process. Don't zone out on me. I want you to learn what it's like to be in the fields right now for the harvest and get a better understanding of the winemaking process, because I was intrigued by these updates. So let's start with Rachel Lightfoot at one of my favorite Nova Scotia wineries, Lightfoot and Wolfville, and she had this update for us. So, quote, due to a fairly cold, wet spring and a slower start to the growing season, we're tracking a couple of weeks behind average in terms of ripening for the grapes. Downy mildew pressure. Now, when they say pressure, that means things that are affecting. They use pressure a lot, disease pressure, pest pressure. It just means the risk or the damage, really. But you'll sound very, very smart if you say pressure. So downy mildew pressure was a concern at the beginning of the season, but disease pressure is fairly low as nights are quite cool. So that will kill off diseases. Cold temperatures at night will help. And the fruit is in good shape. The crop size appears to be fairly average, although we have chosen to crop thin certain late ripening varieties, grapes, a bit more than usual to enhance the ripening on account of the cooler season. Luckily, the damage from Hurricane Dorian, yes, they had to deal with big damage in Halifax, but fortunately not so much in the wine regions, was fairly minimal, she says, for grape growers in the province. My mom lives in Halifax. She just flew home today to Nova Scotia. She joined us for Canadian Thanksgiving. And in Halifax, like blocks from where she lives, there's a huge crane still over. They haven't repaired it. One of those building cranes. But at least in the Annapolis Valley, where most of the grape growing goes on, they weren't as affected. So Rachel says we did experience some light canopy and trellis damage. So she's talking about the grape leaves that protect the grapes in certain areas, but our fruit was mostly unaffected by the storm. Yay. So far, we've harvested our most early ripening varieties. Sigariba, it's a German white grape For aromatic blends, Marquette for our Fauna Red, picking Lacadie Blanc grapes today, and starting to pick certain blocks of Chardonnay for sparkling. It's looking like it will be a great sparkling vintage. All right. So that's kind of cool, eh? So let's go now with one more report from Nova Scotia and one more sip of my wine. Jörg Stutz from Domaine du Grand Pré, which is another one of my Nova Scotia favorite wineries, not just because the wines are great, but they've got a great lunch place. Beautiful trellis patio. He says, we only really started harvesting this week. One small batch for sparkling wine last week, but that's it so far. Having said that, it's very late for harvesting due to the cold and wet spring, where we lost at least 2 weeks of decent growing season. That's very consistent with what Rachel Lightfoot is saying. And it just never caught up over summer. Of course, the later the harvest goes into October, the more problems we have with birds. Of course, starlings love those grapes. They love them some grapes, and that's why they put the nets over the vines to stop starlings from eating them all. And I think I've told you this in the past, but starlings were not native to North America. Some idiot brought them to Central Park, New York, because he brought all the songbirds in Shakespeare's sonnets. And until then, starlings were not part of North America bird life. And then they spread like rats on wings and have been vintner's worst enemy ever since. Back to Jörg. Jörg says, it seems that lots of areas are still showing the effects from last season and have not fully recovered. The late spring frost in June of 2018 and the early frost and wintry temperatures of fall 2018. So the vines have a life. It's like humans and trees. They will show the effects of previous years, previous effects, previous diseases, whatever, stresses. It's kind of cool the way it can still translate. It's not all about just that year. It's what happened the previous years. So there were sections of the vineyard that had very weak growth and small yields, especially the viniferiferas, so your classic grapes like your Chardonnays, your Cabernets, and some hybrids. Red hybrids seem to have recovered the quickest. Overall, it will be a small crop. We've had 2 very unusual seasons, Jörg says, in a row. There's nothing really to compare it to. The jury's still out, and we'll see. All right. Now let's go to Ontario, shall we? Anne Sperling, who's one of my favorite winemakers. She's bold with her biodynamics, organics, orange wine, everything else. So I asked her some questions on email, and her first response was, sorry, I'm on a forklift weighing grapes. I got 3 hours sleep last night since we ran the wine machines. Basically, Gamay, Chardonnay, and Pinot Noir are in, meaning she's harvested them. The Bordeaux Reds, Cabernet Merlot, Vidal for her orange wines, and Riesling are left to go. Gotta go. Thank you, Anne. And let's go now also to Klaus Reif from Reif Winery in Ontario. He says, we would rate the 2019 vintage as an 8 out of 10. Despite the rain and cold temperatures in the spring, nice temperatures with just the right amount of rain in the summer made up for it. It's interesting how, gosh, you're on the edge. You have to play by Mother Nature's rules. Just have to deal with the hand you're dealt. The fruit is very clean and healthy. That's a good expression to use if you, again, want to be impressive. Good, healthy, clean fruit. You know, when they crush bunches of grapes, you don't want some that are ripe, some that are unripe, some that got little spots of mold or disease, some that are fully matured. You want bunches that are consistently ripe and healthy to make a good wine, because those inconsistencies show in the wine. And Klaus says it shows a perfect balance of sweetness and acidity in the grapes. What is stunning this year is the health of the fruit with no breakdown at all. The yields are also just about right. Not too high, so they're not getting too many grapes in, which would compromise the quality because flavors become diluted. If you have too many grapes, that's too few nutrients from the vine going to the fruit. They become less flavorful. And not too low so that they don't have enough supply for their customers. The most comparable recent year would be 2016 if you're looking for a benchmark for 2019. We picked so far Pinot Noir, Sauvignon Blanc, Pinot Gris, Chardonnay, Gamay Noir, Gewürztraminer, and Kerner, which is a unique wine for Rife, and I love it. It's floral and beautiful. We still have to pick our Bordeaux Reds. Those are always the late ripeners, just like others have said already. Our Riesling, and of course our Vidal for the ice wine. What we've picked so far, the highlights are the Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. It's interesting because Rachel Lightfoot, Nova Scotia, is saying it's going to be a sparkling vintage. What's in sparkling? Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. And of course, Pinot Meunier sometimes. Overall, the quality is above average, says Klaus, and we love this vintage and are looking forward to amazing 2019 wines. Now let's fly out to BC, shall we, with Mary McDermott from Township 7 Vineyards and Winery, and her update is as follows. Overall, 2019 was challenging. However, my experience in working in Ontario was invaluable here in BC, as many of the difficulties presented this vintage she went through in Ontario. The weather was a big factor this year. Rain in September played havoc with picking schedules and also brought more disease pressure than is normal for the Okanagan, which is usually typically low. Yeah, the Okanagan is the last 30 miles of the Sonoran Desert. So although I never get my head around this, but although it's technically a cool climate, it's part of a desert. Anyway, we'll deal with that another time. So she says we had to be extra vigilant. That being said, the estate fruit turned out really well. So the fruit that they grow in their own vineyards that they own. And they found that deer was the biggest pest this year rather than starlings. I wonder why that is, but we'll have to ask. Some varieties or grapes came in slightly heavy as they picked up weight with the rains in September, but overall it was an average crop size. The last couple of years have been bigger crops, so we're just getting back to normal. I asked her, which harvest does this compare most closely to in previous years? She wasn't sure about this because she hasn't been working in the Okanagan that long, or only since 2014. But the general manager of the winery, Mike Raffins, felt it was perhaps similar to 2009 when they had a similar early frost event around Thanksgiving. Which grapes did best this year? Hard to say, she says, but we're still in the fermentation process. However, some of the aromatic whites are truly fantastic, and sparkling is good. Are you sensing a trend here, a theme? Sparkling aromatic whites? For the reds, it's too early to say. We cut back our yields, so we'll be fine. At this point, she says we're finished picking all of the whites and Pinot Noir, which is always an early ripener. We'll be finished Merlot this week. Shortly after, Syrah, Cabernet Franc, and then only Cab Sauv to pick. That's one of the last ripeners, those Bordeaux Reds. We're fortunate to have done extensive crop production. So they've been trimming grape bunches so that what's left on the vine, those remaining grape bunches get all the nutrients, therefore all the concentrated flavor. Okay, so that's cool. Great. And I've got one more update from a BC winery. I've got one more update from BC for you from Hester Creek Winery. And the president of Hester Creek, Mark Sheridan, has given me this update with notes from his winemakers. This year started well above seasonal average temperatures, with concerns that a possible early bud break would be susceptible to spring frost. So again, here's where we learn about the process. If you get too warm temperatures, say in February or wherever, and those buds go out, and then you get a frost that kills the buds, then you never get a bud set. You never get those flowering of the grapes. These concerns, he says, were quickly put to rest with an intense cold snap in February, kept the buds in. Temperatures dipping to, more than minus 20 degrees Celsius, not talking Fahrenheit, well below normal, and holding back the bud break. Fortunately, there was no winter damage on our vines due to attentive viticulture management of a weighty crop the previous fall. So we're seeing some trends here. Following careful crop reduction, trimming back, and a timely harvest of 2018, the vines were able to achieve good nutrient balance. Here's an interesting thing. Achieve good nutrient and carbohydrate uptake for their annual root flush, ensuring safe dormancy over winter. So there's that last before they go to sleep over the winter. They need those nutrients to hibernate. Bud break on April 15th, nicely uniform. seasonally average temperatures, very few heat spikes during summer, good balanced growing season overall. Harvest started September 3rd. Temperatures were somewhat warmer in September, more precipitation than normal. Again, lots of rain in September across the board here, which will bloat your grapes, dilute the flavors. But again, it also matters what happened before and after, and even the previous years. So they harvested Pinot Blanc on September 7th. Okay, lots of their aromatic whites came in. They harvested some old vines, Trebbiano, some old blocks, late September, early October. They've been careful with the harvest dates and are looking for sunny, dry days on which to harvest. Yeah, you want the grapes at optimal health, peak ripeness, and flavor concentration. You don't want them bloated from rain. First of their reds, the Merlot, started at the beginning of October for harvest, followed by some Cabernet Franc for their rosé. There was a severe widespread frost event in the Okanagan, October 9th. This hastened the scheduling pick dates, especially for those later Bordeaux reds like Cabernet Franc, Cabernet Sauv, as well as Syrah. The overall quality of the fruit hasn't been affected by the frost. The bricks aren't as high or as hot as last year, but they're near their maturity and elegant. Everything will wrap up by Christmas with the Old Vines Pinot Blanc for our late harvest wine. Lovely summary. All right. I think an update on the harvest is a good lesson in winemaking, kind of what winemakers are looking for and what ultimately affects the wines we drink. If we understand the process, I think we understand the taste of wine and appreciate it more. That's why I wanted to kind of take a little bit of a deep dive into harvest this year as an example for you. So let me know if there are other topics you'd like to talk about. As always, you can join me on a free online video wine class at nataliemaclean.com/class. I cannot wait to relaunch my flagship course with you and a new course. I'm looking forward to joining you next week. I appreciate you. You take care. Bye for now.
Well, there you have it. You'll find links to my pairing tips for wine and chocolate, the wineries mentioned in the harvest updates, and how you can get notified about the new free wine class in the show notes at nataliemaclean.com/50. What was your favorite tip or quote from this episode? Share that with me, please, on Twitter or Facebook and tag me at Natalie MacLean. On Instagram, I'm at Natalie MacLean Wine. If you like this episode, please tell a friend about it, especially one who's interested in pairing wine and chocolate. My podcast is easy to find, whether you search Google on its name, Unreserved Wine Talk, or on my name. I can't wait to share more wine stories with you next week. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this one. I hope something great is in your glass this week. Perhaps a terrific port with those chocolate truffles.
You don't want to miss one juicy episode of this podcast, especially the secret full-bodied bonus episodes that I don't announce on social media. So subscribe for free now at nataliemaclean.com/subscribe. Meet me here next week. Cheers.